Thank you so much for talking to me.
No, you're very welcome.
Stephen wondered if we could talk mainly about the Irish movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was reading down through the what you've put together for the Irish movies. How did that come about? Did you decide? Did they tender for application to go into the festival?
It's a combination, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose in two ways. We have a platform, which is our sort of submission platform, which is Film Freeway. And what's really interesting is that we've been without a box for a number of years, and it just didn't seem to be working. So Film Freeway was a real change this year. But I think primarily for the sort of international films, but for a number of the Irish ones. And the festival really does it through that way, which is through the submissions. Or we actually do it through invitation. And so the trick is to try and, invite people to, allow you to see the films. And then the submissions is fantastic because then that captures all the others. Do you know what I mean? So you can see as many as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of just trying to actually find some.
And is obviously the weeks coming up to, when do you start like full on preparing?
Well, you see, with the Irish, the rules are completely different because sort of Irish international. I mean, the international sort of starts probably around April. I go to a couple of film festivals in April, and it'll probably start there. The Irish, the Irish films, a lot of them aren't finished until December.
Before,
the days thing scares me, but days.
Yeah.
But you are actually trying to see everything by at least the first week in December.
Okay.
That mostly because you need to get an idea about what the sort of the style or the subject or the quality is like in order to see whether or not it's actually going to be something for DIFF. Because I'm always conscious that for me, the films have to work for themselves and work for the festival.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense if we take something that was rushed in order to get to the festival.
Yeah.
And equally, I would nearly argue that I've tried always to be very fair with distributors, with sales agents, with producers, that you need to put a film into a festival that it's going to benefit from. And don't go too early just because you want to show it to your friends.
Absolutely.
Make sure that it actually has a platform and a plan.
Yes.
And I think that's something that we've been working on this year.
That's a really good concept. And that's obviously then the ethos that you've applied to all of these
to these films.
Here.
Well, I mean, there's you issue an invitation. And you would have the conversation with the producer or the director, and you'd say, I'd really like to show this film, and they'd say, I don't have a sales agent, I'm not quite sure, or they say, we don't, we have a plan, we're going out and release. Sing Steet's a very good example.
Okay. I was going to ask you about Sing Steet.
For instance, I had been hearing on the grapevine that it was really, really good, so I immediately got on to everybody involved and said, I'd like to see it. And then I heard, increasingly from people who had seen it, it's fantastic, you have to see it.
Yeah.
From then it became quite easy. Then it was actually our dates, what slot would it be? You know that it will probably be at least, a sure thing for Sundance because of once being there before. So it fits into the plan.
Okay.
So we're just after Sundance, quite neatly tucked in. So they'll go Sundance, they'll go Dublin, they'll go out on release.
Okay.
And they also have a UK distributor who had a big success with Brooklyn.
Okay.
So they actually knew about the importance of an Irish audience for an Irish film, which is another part of this discussion, because if you don't have a distributor that knows, then there are, I think, there are gaps that can happen,
Are there touches of the commitments in Sing Steet, would you say? Or there...
I mean, there are. I think the thing is that you say, Dublin set musical, and everybody goes, oh, it's the commitments! And you're like, it's not quite.
Well, you kind of want to be remembered for other things.
I think there's a lot of this. What is lovely about it is it's a very John Carney genre, in that it kind of skillfully avoids description in a way. Okay. So it might start off as a coming of age story about a guy who moves schools, gets bullied and forms a band really to impress a girl, which is probably a genre we've seen many times before, but it's set in Dublin, and his bandmates are the most odd looking crew you'd ever meet. It's set in 1985, one of the kind of years that fashion forgot.
Absolutely.
But the music,
I remember I was there.
The music is Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran and The Cure. So you already have people half smiling at this nostalgia. And then they suddenly burst into song. And these kids can sing. So it suddenly sort of, takes itself from one particular type of film into another. It's incredibly modest. So it actually, you feel as you're watching it that it's kind of, just, a very simple story, but it has a huge emotional sort of like, punch that happens about halfway through. And in a way, I'd say that the commitments, because it's an Alan Parker film as well, I think people forget that. It has its punctuation points, which are the songs.
Absolutely.
The characters are drawn in that particular way.
And there is very much a kind of stop, start.
And the punchlines are delivered like punchlines.
Yes,
and it's written by guys who were fantastic sitcom experts, actually. So, I mean, aren't TV half-hour, experts. So, this Sing Steet doesn't feel like that. It feels much more organic. It feels like it flows from one incident to another. There's also a story about, a guy growing up, if you like, in the shadow of a very sort of, influential brother, played by Jack Rayner, who actually, forms his musical taste, is the kind of mentor to our lead, who kind of gives him the guidance that helps him through some of the kind of issues in the film. So it's a very sweet film, but it actually has, as I said, quite tangled thorns in different places. But the songs are fantastic. And as I said, what is interesting about the response in Sundance, and I was literally talking to somebody about it today, is they kept saying, oh, they loved it, it was standing ovations and everybody, and I was going, yeah, well, of course they did, because it's very sweet, But I think for a Dublin audience, they will obviously see the sweet, but they'll also see the kind of underpinnings as well, about a particular type of Dublin, and a particular kind of parochial type of Dublin as well. That means that, there is definitely a sense in 1985 you had to get out. In order to follow your dream, and I think there's definitely a part of that that will have a different resonance. But I think there will be, whoops basically in the Savoy and opening.
Because I think a lot of people, certainly I would have been growing up in the 80s, I would have been in the 20s in the 80s, and two of my siblings are now still living abroad.
Okay.
And so a lot of people went and left.
Yeah.
And so they remember Ireland, they remember Dublin in particular as this kind of capsule. The time really sort of stood still. And I know people even who went away, when they came back, they said, oh, we expected everybody to be sitting in the same bar stools, having the same conversation. But in some ways, this is like that bar stool, that you're you know,
I mean, I think the other side of it is, and I'm very curious about it, is what's lovely is that there's now a generation of filmmakers coming from Ireland that don't feel like they have to make, sort of Hollywood genre films that fit, that they're not squeezing Irish experience or Irish life or Irish characters into a preformed IKEA, if you like, form of storytelling. And what's lovely is the kind of rough edges on certain characters and the kind of unusual sort of sharpness, does ring true. It's a bit, as I said, once had that same very nearly sort of casualness in a way about it. It looked effortless. It looked like they were just met. It was a documentary. They just happened to be cameras there following these people. And I think there is something like that. There's this wonderful informality about John's filmmaking. That it is, as I said, invisible, and it definitely pulls you in. And as I said, I think that's what I'm interested in. That we're not, making these very shouty films. It's not saying they won't understand this in Middle America, so we'll make sure that they do.
Because there are some movies that feel like that they do feel like as though there is certainly very much playing to the audience in particular, and they do spell it out. But this one doesn't.
But they're scared, and I mean I understand because it's a lot of money, and presumably you have a lot of financiers saying, I don't really like the middle bit. Can you make the middle bit so that I understand it? But obviously, John and Martina and the whole gang involved seem to have been able to keep it very true to what they wanted, because you genuinely do feel there is a singular vision. There's very clear, I suppose, sense of place and time and character in it.
It's interesting as well that a group of people managed to work together and come up with such a clear vision of what it was that they wanted to do.
But isn't that part and parcel of making a film that's about your childhood that you can control? Do you know what I mean? And also, I'm presuming, I wouldn't ask the vulgar question of how much money it cost, but it's not zillions, so you can keep your control.
Because sometimes as well, I agree with you about the control, but sometimes as well you might have you might see portions where one person's image of something is slotted in, and then it follows through with the other person's image. But this is effortless. So it means that was very much a great team effort, and they worked very well together, so that the vision was unified and it was a singular
I
vision.
think so, yeah. But I think, John, I think he obviously directed it, wrote it, but he's also written some of the songs. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think when you actually have that kind of sort of like connection, talent in the centre, it probably makes it slightly easier. Yeah,
true. I was looking at Further Beyond, Christine Malloy and Joe Lawler, and it's about
Ambrose Higgins.
Yes, and I thought that was an interesting take on not necessarily talking so much about his life, but following the trips that he would have taken and gone to, the areas that he would have gone to, and they mentioned in particular like the journey from Ireland to Chile and key locations in his life.
It's very much about the man before he became the myth in a way. And I think what's interesting is the Real Art programme and the scheme, which is something that actually Filmbase and the festival work with the Arts Council on, is very, very firmly positioned as an artists' fund. It's a project whereby two filmmakers each year are given an opportunity to make a film completely to their way of thinking and to tell the story the way they want to tell it, without the interference of funders or broadcasters or anything. And I think this is a documentary produced by two really, really interesting filmmakers who've worked as a filmmaking team for many, many years now. And I think they were, again, going back to that idea of not wanting to tell a story in a very kind of traditional or straightforward way. They wanted to capture a kind of the multifacets of this particular man without actually making it one of those biopics that starts with the credits and the photo of the time, and finishing with the death, and to actually move more in a sort of fragmented way, but equally to kind of through images and mood to try and create a kind of portrait. So it's a very interesting experience. It's very witty. It's very funny. I didn't know anything about him, so I was kind of intrigued to sort of see how you can tell stories about someone and create a kind of a sense of the man, even with the sort of approach that they took, which, as I said, kind of eschews so many of the traditional things. Like
I liked the fact that they
stuff.
Sort of brought in the tangible elements of his life, that they brought you to places that would have been absolutely stunning to look at, but still it was equally, well, he was here and we are here now.
Yes, and the process of I'm really curious about, the fact that, on the table when we came in there was a script, and that actually is the start of a particular journey. And, there's a lovely start to the film in which they have two different people who are doing the voiceovers. There's a man and a woman, and they both compete, and they want to know who's going to be listed first in the credits. And there's a game, because, we are very aware, if you think about Scary Movie 3 and stuff like that we're very aware of the postmodern in sort of fiction films. But in documentary, there's a playfulness, I think, about this film that I think really is quite endearing, and it actually really will pull people in and make them think about the way in which we read, as I said, biographies or obituaries, and we think that we will get a sense of the person, without actually, realizing that we're just processing. We just want to get to the end. This actually forces you to think about what are you looking at, and we're very aware that when we were putting this image together, it would make you think in a particular way. So it's very playful, and it's great fun. It's a lovely addition, actually, that and the other film, which is the Claire Dix documentary, which is the one about Denise Moriarty.
I was going to talk about Claire Dix as well, because Claire Dix was one of my lecturers in DBS.
Oh, right, okay,
and she's just a really, really good filmmaker. And
she's fantastic.
And she's totally, she's totally focused, and she knows what she wants, and she does it. And she's really, really in the moment, and she is.
I think the thing that's interesting, I remember because the last film of Claire's was Broken Song, which was one that also came through the Real Art programme.
Yeah, and that was also in one of the previous festivals.
It was, yes,
about 2 years ago.
It's about 2 years ago, and I remember when she came in and she pitched the idea, and it was about this guy with this amazing voice, but he had kind of sort of some issues, and it was like, okay, right, they're going to have to really make a connection to the kid and to the area, in order for this to work, and Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work, but that's exactly what the scheme is for. You know, it's for people to actually move and develop their own sort of aesthetic. But I remember seeing Broken Song for the first time and just thinking it was such a beautiful film, and that this intimacy that she'd managed to create with the lead character, but equally just as a film it was so enjoyable to look at and to experience. And I think she's done something similar here. It's a completely different film, but again it's you know it's a kind of portrait of a figure who I think I don't have any huge knowledge of, but I remember the reverence with which she was basically, you know, remembered and talked about on radio predominantly. I remember people talking about her.
They were saying that there were some who were being, I was just reading here that she was accused of fabricating her professional dance training and of misrepresenting herself as a vanguard of Irish ballet. But what is beautiful about this is that the story is told regardless, and that there's no judgment being given. No. And that in actual fact, regardless of what her credentials were, her heart was 100% was in the process, and that she wanted to convey that message to people.
But I think that's part of the, you know, just linking the kind of filmmakers that we're talking about at the moment. I mean, it is a sign of maturity, I think, when you realise that filmmakers are able and strong enough to stand up for their right to tell a story a particular way. And I think, you know, the real arts are different maybe from Sing Steet because, you know, they're very specifically supportive of filmmakers' visions. You know, there's not a very strong or heavy commercial aspect to it. But I think it's you know, the quality, and I mean, I'm on the judging panel every year, but it is really interesting to see the sort of the quality of the filmmakers who come in and how it's not, as I said, that heavy critical, you know, or promotional or sort of trying to restore reputations. It's more, you know, it's
purely,
much more
you're not
pure.
playing to the gallery, you're purely and simply making a movie that, yes, it works, but it's also more, what's the word for it? As you said earlier on, more organic.
I think so. It interrogates and it allows the film to sort of exist and breathe in its own space. It's not, as I said, you know, it doesn't come from a hugely, I suppose, sort of, you know, pressurizing or demanding space where there has to be certain solutions or resolutions or an end that makes people feel a particular way.
Or excuses made.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, it is a very mature. I mean, one of the things, I mean, I don't really like kind of the sort of, you know, is there a big theme of the festival? You're like, well, not really. But I think the thing that is really interesting is that in the year that everybody's talking about Irish talent is that you're seeing filmmakers who are not afraid to take risks and not afraid to make films that will challenge audiences. And I think that's the thing I'm really intrigued by. I've always given out about, you know, in order to make films, you have to watch films. And I think one of the reasons why you have to watch films is, A, to see what else is being made and to see or steal from some of the greatest sort of filmmakers in the world. But it's equally the actual activity of being an audience member. And, you know, I see it all the time that some of the sort of laziest filmmakers are those who think that audiences are lazy. And that some of the best filmmakers know that audiences are alive and alert and are interested in being challenged and engaged and in some cases, you know, are capable of making huge leaps, quite bold leaps that I think, you know, people don't often give them credit for.
I agree.
And I think Claire is somebody who's very, very good at that.
I'm delighted that Claire Dix's movie is in this. Neil Jordan's Michael Collins.
God bless us. We all know where we were 20 years ago. That's what is funny about Michael Collins. I mean, the thing is that really, in a way, the Michael Collins project came out of an event we did last year with Barry Lyndon, where it was the 40th anniversary of Barry Lyndon, which was obviously partially shot in Ireland. And so we brought Ryan O'Neill and we brought the producer, Jan Harlan, back to talk about the experiences. And in a way, when Warner Brothers were telling us that they were going to do a reissue of Michael Collins, it seemed like a really nice opportunity to revisit something that we talk about, and definitely successive departments of arts have always referred to, which is the kind of the connection that filmmaking and production has to sort of country. You know, I mean, obviously it gives employment, but there is actually something that people actually remember where they were, or they were on the sets, or they got held up because the roads were closed because they were filming something. And Michael Collins seemed to be very definitely one of the bigger ones. Everybody in Dublin seemed to be part of the extras. I know half the film industry was either involved in the production notes or they were involved in some part of it. And as I said, it just seemed a nice, and also with the year that's in it seemed like a nice opportunity to sort of like go back. So, you know, Tony Lawson, Chris Menges, Neil Jordan, Redmond, Morris, you know, a good gang of them will hopefully be joining us in the Savoy, with a lot of the extras who are obviously, you know, around and I suppose desperate to see if they can spot themselves this time around.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But I suppose the other side of it, which people forget, is that, you know, a lot of us involved in the industry, we kind of go, oh, you know, Michael Collins, 20 years, that was after, you know, Neil had just had Interview with the Vampire, that was, you know, where his career was at that stage. You know, Liam Neeson before he started, you know, sort of tracking down his daughter. All of these things. Three times, isn't it?
He keeps losing the girl.
But do you know what I mean? I mean, it is really a very specific time.
Yeah.
There's a whole group of people who haven't seen the film on the big screen. It's a fantastic film. I mean, it looks absolutely stunning with a great score. I mean, all of the actors, I think, are really, really powerful.
I think Liam Neeson is so well cast.
He's so well cast.
Yeah.
So I mean, in a way, you know, what's nice about it is that you're sort of, you know, I sometimes feel a tiny bit like, oh, it's the anniversary. You know, it's like the kind of greeting card form of programming. You know, it's like, oh, you'll never guess it's 22 years since blah. You know, but in this case, I think there's actually lots of things to celebrate. And as I said, you know, Neil has written the note in the programme, and I think, you know,
he certainly has,
really
and
interesting.
it's really nice the way he talks about how it has developed and how he decided to bring back the historical context, and then he was saying that there was the movies that he made before Michael Collins, which were in this genre, which were
Angel and Crying Game,
the Crying Game, and then he made this, and he said that it was. He just had. He said it was always going to be about violence, but he also felt that it was about where Ireland was at that point in time.
Yeah, that I think that it was viewed, if you like, the violence became the prism through which it was viewed rather than any other way, and that it would be really interesting to look at it 20 years, 20 years on and see what are the other things that you might focus on. And I mean, I think we also remember that, you know, the vast arguments that raged through the national papers, you know, back and forth with people taking particular points of view. I mean, in some ways,
and they were so critical at the time, but now,
now it'd be fascinating to see, you know, where those commentators, you know, have they changed their mind? Have they not changed their mind? You know, Ireland quite literally was another country.
Yes,
you know, so it is
was,
kind of, you know, really interesting from that point of view.
And
you know, and the other side of it is you know, when you look down through the cast, you just realise, you know, that it was a huge film in a way because, you know, it was the Irish film industry. They're all there, you know, and look at where we are now, and you wonder whether or not you can trace some of that success back to actually having a film like Michael Collins. And equally, we're all talking about the success of Rome, and isn't it fantastic how many Irish people have gone to see Brooklyn? You know, for a long time, Michael Collins was the kind of box office champ in terms of Irish films. That many people went to see an Irish film is, you know, extraordinary. And the record held for so long. I think it was Mrs. Brown's Boys or something like that finally kind of beat it.
Right, well,
we'll see. It's been reissued again, and maybe Michael Collins could take it back.
Michael Collins will rise again.
And
be
take
like
it
Lazarus.
back.
He'll come back. I thought the concept in Traders is very interesting. And
the thing about Traders is that I am kind of amused. There's a part of me that sort of thinks that it has a concept not dissimilar to a kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of like 80s or 90s.
I thought even Hunger Games.
Or Hunger Games, exactly. You know, and I think it is a very, very clever concept. I think it's also very rooted in Dublin because, you know, one of the things is that Cillian Scott and John Bradley play two guys who, when I saw them, I went, they're not young enough to be bankers, they're not young enough to be financial whizzes. And I went, no, they are, actually. It's just that I have in my head the idea that the guys who, you know, lost all the money are actually kind of fat cats in their late 50s, you know. And I think the urgency that the film actually portrays about these guys who, you know, have the car and they have the apartment and they have the lifestyle, and then when you take that away, they are driven to the type of actions that the film actually tells. And I think the other thing is that it's very clever, it's very smart. it's got a kind of wry sense of humour. I think something that actually does have that kind of Hunger Games Fight Club kind of element to it, you know.
Or even on a very small level, maybe Lord of the Flies.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the other thing about it, which is really interesting from my point of view, is that this is my 9th festival, I think, that I've programmed, and one of the things that I'm fascinated about is when I started, you know, you're always going, okay, and these Irish actors, and they were in this film, which was in the IFI for 20 minutes, and they were in that film, and that was in the FLA last year. Now, we actually put brackets and we say Love, Hate, or Game of Thrones, and there's a whole new audience that have connections to Irish actors, and to other actors indeed, purely through television, you know. And I think what's lovely is you know, and Cillian is one of the many stars that has actually broken through in the last couple of years, that does have a certain debt to Irish television. But equally, I mean, he was, I think, one of the star turns in Calvary, which was a film that we actually opened with 2 years ago. Again, a film a tiny bit like Michael Collins that just had so much Irish talent on screen. But again, I think the great thing about Traders is that I genuinely do think it will work for an audience that possibly are more accustomed to seeing Marvel films. You know, I think that's the other thing. I mean, Michael Collins is fantastic, but we also know that it'll play to a particular type of audience. Hopefully it'll be a broad audience. But Traders, I hope, will actually be able to maybe tap into that magic sort of 18 to 24-year-old male audience that the Hollywood studios are obsessed with, you know. And it is very smart. It's a very smart film.
I kind of got the impression that it was the sort of movie that essentially what they're doing is still making massive gambles on, but they've pared it down to going from their daily lives, their business lives, back down to a very basic, I
winner
suppose,
takes
primeval, you know, there's either you're going to live or you're going to die, or you're going to, winner takes it all and gets the girl. And that's the way it is. And it's quite primeval in that it's quite a basic concept, but it works very well.
It does work very well. I mean, I think that, you know, John Bradley and Cillian, it's a great kind of double act. You know, there's sort of like this sort of, you know, the I don't know, the hero and his nemesis. You know, it's that idea of the two guys kind of locked in that. I mean, you'd see it, for instance, if you wanted to in Revenant. You know, that there is that idea that there's two people and the audience kind of wonder who is going to get the better of the other, and they're never quite sure which way it's going to go.
And it seems as well there's a kind of a thing of, and I suppose it's a little bit of a shame in some ways in that the good deed, which you would think is the good deed of one guy letting the other guy off, even though the ultimate goal was to winner takes all, loser ceases to be, and you know that the good deed is not going unpunished. Except that haven't we learned anything from the last 10 years? Do you know what I mean? That you know, interestingly, a lot of the people who you know did do the good thing, do you know what I mean, got punished as well as the people who didn't. You know, and I think that kind of grey morality is definitely part of the film. You know, that the idea that you know, you think you're doing a good thing, but it'll come back and bite you. You know, and big time.
And that, you know, unless you man up and kill the other guy, you're not going to get away with it. You know, you're not going to get, life is not going to be so peachy. And I you know, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I think audiences actually have very much bought into that kind of dark, sort of slightly, you know, pessimistic, cynical view of the world. I think we all, you know, genuinely do think, oh, you know, everyone's out for themselves, and you know, no one would ever do a good thing, because we've sort of seen, I think, that we've become quite defensive and protection. I also think as well, social media has pushed people into a situation where what you think is real, or an emotion or sentiment that you think is real and tangible, is not. That people it's very rare to see it in the cinema.
Faking it.
I mean, I would have thought that actually one of the things that maybe linked Brooklyn and Rum was the idea of emotion. I mean, people were crying in both of those films, crying, not crying tears of laughter, you know, not crying fear, you know, but actual emotion connected to it. And I think that, you know, you're right. But I think it's quite amusing that they're both Irish films that actually have that connection, that unashamed. I mean, I often think about, you know, the success of My Left Foot. You know, not to, you know, suggest that Rome is My Left Foot, you know, however many years later, but you know, there is definitely that kind of heart that I think has definitely had that connection with American audiences, you know, which is that sense that, you know, you are talking about the love of a mother for her son. Do you know what I mean? And it's actually that simple. It's that primal, you know, and that we go to films and we're so used to going, you know, he did a nice thing, but I don't think it's going to work out. Do you know what I mean? You know, that no, he shouldn't have done that. No,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
he's left himself vulnerable. You know,
Yes.
and I think part of that is definitely, you know, a lot of the, you know, TV that we're watching, like The Wire or Sopranos, where every episode is somebody finding out that they shouldn't have done something.
Yeah,
you know,
the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was the Truth Commissioner. I
It's
thought,
fantastic.
Oh, this poor guy. He comes in to try and sort things out and set up a Truth Commission.
No, I hadn't read the
Northern
book,
Ireland.
so I mean, you know, that's one of the things that really annoys me about when people talk about adaptations. You know, literally the first line is always, it was better or worse than the book. I hadn't read the book, so I went, you know, with maybe only, I think there was a John Boorman film with Juliette Binoche about the peace and reconciliation trials in South Africa, I think. But I know that it's a very powerful device. The idea of the man that comes into the community that's kind of given a certain amount of leeway, like a judge in the old westerns, I suppose, that comes in and you know, is given the responsibility for dispensing justice. Roger Allam is fantastic. I mean, he's somebody who I've seen, for instance, and loved actually in The Thick of It, where he plays a kind of bumbling minister actually. But what I liked about this, and I thought Declan did a really good job of making the familiar interesting, which is the idea of, you know, Stormont, politicians, you know, the two sides of the war, the way in which we all go, oh yes, look, we've seen that guys before, we've seen the loyalist you know, politicians, we've seen the sort of spin doctors. And I felt that there was a freshness to the story and a pace to the story. I mean, again, just even to mention The Thick of It, there is a lot of politics on telly. I think, you know, with House of Cards and stuff like that. We're very familiar with those tropes.
And I think,
you know,
we don't necessarily even notice them anymore.
I think we don't, and I think we will, obviously, over the coming... I mean, actually, somebody on the radio the other day was talking about how they were talking about the type of photos that they'd like from the elections, and they said, well, obviously, we're looking for the one that is when it goes slightly wrong, or the politician looks the wrong way, or at the wrong person. And it is about that. It's the off message is actually the thing that you're looking for. And I think the thing about Truth Commissioner, as I said, is a very smart film. You know, it takes a kind of story that I'm sure plays very well, maybe internationally, because there is that slight distance about, you know, Stormont and the North. But as I said, creates an energy for me. I thought the actors were fantastic. I thought Barry Ward was really, really good. And I hope when it comes out that it actually, as I said, does get that kind of audience that likes a smart thriller and likes that kind of, you know, it is a tiny bit of, you know, the person who comes home to their hotel room in the middle of the night and there's a letter under the door and that changes the dynamic. You know, absolutely. I love West Wing, so I am a complete sort of fan. But it is clever and it's very fresh, and as I said, it's very, very well cast.
No, it definitely seemed, I mean, I could pick up from what they were writing about it. It's definitely sounded like one to watch. I was very interested. Very interested in the Hubert Butler.
Now, you explained to me, I did not know who he was. Did you know who he was?
Yes, I've met Hubert Butler.
All right, there you go. I was like, come on.
More than once. But I was very young, so I wouldn't.
Did you know who he was when you met him?
I did not know who he was. But what I do remember is that this was a gentleman down to his absolute toes, and every person that he met. Even at that age, I was very young. Even at that age, I realised that he was somebody special. And you could tell. And I met his wife. I was in his house a number of times in Maidenhall down in Bennett's Bridge. My father knew him, and my father's surname is Butler. So So he knew him, and they were just really, really, really lovely people, and they were absolutely just decent and very kind and very understanding, and you could tell that he had a special wisdom about him that was just you don't see in many people.
I mean, what I found funny is that, as I said, I go to lots of different film festivals and I have a lot of friends, and I'm on the board of the Cultural Centre in Paris, and one of the things I love is that when I meet my sort of French friends and I try to sort of go to see exhibitions, and, you know, they kind of give me sort of biographies, that if he was French, he'd be you know what I mean? There'd be streets named after him, or buildings named after him, or schools, or whatever. Like, literally. And that was what I was shocked about when I saw Johnny's film. I just went, how? As a relatively educated person, did I not know who he was? How had I not read him in school, or at least in college? Now, maybe I'm forgetting a big section, or I was off or sick that day. But I felt that was something that I was really intrigued by. And that also that type of Renaissance character in Irish society, you know, is often left behind, isn't it? You know, I mean, as I said,
because he was different.
Yeah.
I think that's essentially it. He was a very good writer. I have a number of his books. I have yet to finish one, but that's because I'm in college doing other things. So there's that. But he has written a number of books, and they're beautifully written. Yeah. You know, and he's got
that comes across in the film actually, that there's a real
words.
Yeah, he's a wordsmith. Yeah,
he's a warm character. Like he was a really, really decent person.
I mean, I think it'll be. I hope anyway that this will be an opportunity for, as I said, a kind of resurgence of interest.
But I agree with you. Why aren't there any? You know, why aren't there any?
But isn't that what film festivals are about? Though? You know, I mean, I think you know. I was trying to sort of describe this to a friend of mine the other day, and I said, you know, the thing is that I try to say to people, pick 2 films. You know, if you're going to start off small, so we say, pick 2. One that you know that you'd like, because that's kind of fine. And then pick one that you have no idea. Either just pick it because of the title, or pick it because it's on at a certain time, or find someone who's actually, you know, and discover something. Yeah, because that's actually what happens. You know, it's the equivalent of sort of running through your remote control and stopping on something that looks unfamiliar. And as I said, I'm lucky because I get them sent to me, and I would have discovered this, and I know obviously Johnny Gogan from a long time, you know, and I think this is it kind of seems to be a passion project that he's done pretty much on his own, and I think he's put all of the kind of elements together, without, you know, very much kind of institutional support, but he's had so much. It seems sort of, you know, help and support from people that it's incredibly rich and incredibly detailed, you know. So I think as a first sort of stop for people, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to see that he's getting recognised, and
well, hopefully, as I said, it'll be the start.
It'll be the start of something great. I actually haven't gone into too much detail in the others. Do you want me to?
I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I suppose Viva, in a way, because it's the closing night film, is a really interesting film. I mean, in a way, it's bittersweet that it's our closing film because it's the Paddy Branagh film that was longlisted for the Foreign Language Oscars, which is set in Havana. And it's a project, it's a lovely story. I mean, I was reading around about it, which is obviously that I think after the success of I Went Down, the producer and Paddy were in Havana. I don't know if they were there with the film, but I think they were on holidays. And they ended up in a sort of drag club and sort of met some of the characters and really felt like there was a really interesting sort of atmosphere, and some of the characters had fascinating stories, and it stayed with them. And then they were sort of joined in the process by Mark O'Halloran, who obviously is a very well known screenwriter, who's obviously worked with Lenny Abramson, and a very good actor, and you know what they've created is this wonderful sort of it's extremely warm family drama, I suppose, in a way. I mean, I think what I loved about it was that the dynamic seems to be one that we're sort of the backstage musical, you know. It's the guys who are the drag queens, you know, who sit and row over their lipstick and give out to each other, and the young guy who watches from the sidelines, and then suddenly he gets pulled in, lured into this, or dreams really of becoming a kind of member of the cast of the troupe, of becoming a kind of, you know, coming of age, and into this sort of dynamic, which is also in the hotbed that is Havana, comes his father, who's a famous boxer, and the two have a very difficult, I suppose, reconnection. So it's very, very sweet, as I said, but set in a, I mean, I was lucky enough to go to Havana a couple of years ago, and I was, you know, struck by it, that it's a wonderfully romantic, nostalgic city. It has those old big American cars. It's got the fantastic light, and the food and the music and all of that. And then at night, the Malecon on the front, on the sort of the coast, turns into a much more dangerous and dark place, and there's no real street lamps, and it flips personality, and I think one of the things that's really interesting about Viva is I think that Paddy has captured those kind of twin sort of facets of the personality, but also the performances are lovely. Stephen Rennox has done the music, and it's a really special film. So as I said, from my point of view, it's bittersweet that Paddy and the gang will actually be here, because obviously they should rightfully be in Hollywood on Oscar night, which is our closing night, but they'll actually be with us, and for that I'm kind of grateful.
Yes, absolutely.
We have an audience award, which we'll use hopefully to try and create a kind of energy around what Irish audiences. They nearly always go for an Irish documentary. Broken Song was actually the audience award a couple of years ago. Wave Riders was his and hers. So, hopefully, as I said, from my point of view, I'm interested to see if this year is going to be another Irish film. And I'm nearly sure we've probably talked about it tonight. I have a feeling there's a lot of very popular Irish films that are going to do really well. Not least that we have that fervent, completely obsessive support for our own, in that situation. So everything Irish is 4 stars, is great.
Absolutely. But I love the fact that we're so proud of
absolutely.
what we do, and that carries through. Like the enthusiasm, you can't buy that. Listen, tanya, thank you so much, Grainne.
No.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for being so patient.